Let's talk.
Giles Brown.
Wild at heart, my journey to a country life documents the highs and lows and moments of triumph and tragedy that Jules Hudson has experienced both on and off our screens. You will know him from TV series such as Country File and Escape to the Country. Delighted to say that Jules joins me from a glorious English early summer. I can see this because it's radio. You can't, but my goodness, it makes you want to be back in the old country. Morning, good afternoon, or good morning to you, Jules.
Well, both, mate. Yes, good morning from here. Good afternoon to your listeners over there.
Yeah,
like you say, it's a lovely sunny day here in rural Herefordshire on the Welsh borders.
So for those who have been living underneath, I don't know, well-placed stones, I mean, explain a little bit about how people, they may recognise the voice. They may think, I know that. So you are currently on our screens at what? At Escape to the Country, Country File? What are you working on at the moment?
Well, yes. Well, Escape to the Country is the name of the game over the next few weeks, certainly. I used to do Country File back in the day. I did about 11 years of Country File on and off. And I now spend my time on a lovely show called This Week on the Farm on Channel 5. So I've kind of moved my kind of farming life to another channel. Can you believe it? But in the great company of Helen Skelton, J.B. Gill, and two amazing farmers, Rob and Dave Nicholson, up in Yorkshire. So yeah, I've always been lived a country life pretty much. I mean, the book Wild at Heart is very much the story of how that journey came about, and proof that, you don't need to be born under a hedgerow to become a champion of rural life. I was born in the town, but knew very early on that rural life was for me. And mate, I've just been very lucky to have had a career that's allowed me to really indulge that passion, but also share it, with so many other people.
You see, here's the thing, because if you think about it, I mean, I'm born in Stafford, in Staffordshire. Okay, so I was lucky enough to spend, most of my friends, their dads had farms, so spent an awful lot of my time basically tearing around on a small motorbike at the age of 11, doing schoolboy scrambling. Because if you remember, that,
come on,
yeah, exactly, great fun. But but the British sort of even townies have got a love of the countryside. I mean, they'll be sneakily watching, Country File. They'll be listening to the farmers' reports that they used to do, and you only have to look at programs like your own and indeed Clark's and stuff to say you just scratch beneath this metropolitan elite thing that we have going apparently, and you will find that all of us can't wait to get the green wellies on and get out there and get covered in silage basically.
Yeah, look, I think as Brits, and it'd be interesting to see what you think, coming from where you're broadcasting from at the moment in Spain, but as Brits, I think we've always had an aspiration to country life. And I think, if you go back to not that many years, just pre-industrial revolution, most of us would have, eked out a living from what the countryside had to offer. We didn't have these urban, sprawling towns and industrial bases that we now have. But, I think, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, the great painters, our artists, poets, we've long put country life on a pedestal, that it's somehow simpler, purer, and I think it's an absolute reaction to the horrors of the Industrial Revolution as they unfolded across the country. And I think we've retained that as Brits. I don't think it's unique to us as a country, but my goodness me, we all do have something about it. And I think it's probably, we're not a very big place, are we? Let's be honest. So you're never far from the countryside. But, I meet, people, year in, year out who shared in my vision for life in the country, in a sense that it's slower, that it's at a pace you want it to go at. And of course, as you can see behind me, surrounded by green open spaces. And I think in more recent years, we've all begun to realize just how important they are for our sanity.
Here you are, Jules. But here's the thing, okay? Are we talking proper countryside here? Because if you go, I mean, we suffer from this in Spain as well, because you cannot move for an organic section of your vegetable thing. There are farmers market gardens springing up everywhere with, I don't know, knit your own yogurt or something like that. And therefore, have we got, is there because farming is bloody hard work and it's bloody early. It doesn't matter where you are. And, I remember, staying with my mates in these houses, and it would be kissing down with rain, and it'd be 4 a.m, or it'd be lambing season. And, all my mates were having to get up with their dads because it was all hands to the the pump during lambing season, and you'd go around to the farm, and there'd be about a couple of lambs wrapped in sleeping bags because their mums. It was just mayhem, and it was all bleary eyed, and so none of this sort of floating around in a floaty dress, cuddling ducklings, was it?
No, and look, farming was and always will be a tough business. There's no two ways about it. And, when you look at global events, all of those things, feed in, to the challenges that farmers face. And we can't make people be farmers. We're not China. We have to encourage the next generation to come into farming. But when I look across the landscape behind me, it's a working landscape. It's a hard working landscape. And, the pressures that farmers face when you live in a farming community, as you will have seen, growing up, are all too real. But it is a team sport. And it's not just if you're in a farming family. I think those of us that live in and amongst the farming community, we all see, what's coming. And whether it's, I can sit here and enjoy the sunshine, but I know my neighbors who are farming spuds at the moment will be thinking, how long is this going to go on for? Are we going to have to start irrigating? What's the yield going to be come the end of the year? There are so many gambles in farming, but it is the fabric that joins the countryside together. Yes, it's a place where we grow stuff, but, farming also manages the landscape, and it's really important. It's a green and pleasant land, but it doesn't happen by accident.
Yeah, and also the thing is, farming communities. I mean, I remember, again, going around on my grifter. That dates me. But do you know what I mean?
Yeah, my God. Yeah, right.
Exactly. But again, I'm Staffordshire, Shropshire borders, and farming communities are unlike any other community because, and here comes a spoiler alert, you are tied to the land, surprisingly enough, and so therefore, if you are the Joneses, you are so and so's son, and people remember your grandfather because you've always had that land, and there's a connection to that and to your ancestral history that maybe you're not going to get if you're living in an urban area. But you're not from as I said before, you weren't born under a hedgerow. So how did you get into this? Because I'm not going to say it was all the Wicker Man or Straw Dogs when you rocked up, but how do you transfer yourself? Our strangers. How do you transfer yourself, Jules, from an urban environment to a country environment?
Yeah, well, it's a very good question, and it occupies a large chunk of the front of the book, really, because it was my sister's fault, to be perfectly honest. She is somewhat older than I am. I won't tell you just how much, but needless to say, she was in her teens when I rocked up into her world, and she had a love of horses and the great outdoors, and she introduced me to that. And I think from a very early age, I was always out with her, and I was very fortunate. When I was about 11 or 12, she was running a livery yard, horse yard, and they had a mare in there that had been injured, that was going to be put down probably. And the call came, look, if you can look after her, if you can get her sound again, you can have her. And so that was the challenge that I met age 12 or so, and myself and my lovely Connemara cross thoroughbred mare, Honey. She was a classic Connemara, dun coloured, black nose, black mane, black tail, lovely black stripe along her back. We just became this inseparable team, exploring the countryside around the small yard that we moved into to home her just outside Colchester in Essex, where I was born. And I think just between us, growing up, I grew up in a B&B, which was madness. That was just chaotic. And then I went to boarding school, which was more madness. And yet the countryside was this place where I could just get away from it all. And I think between us, we made it our own. And that I just knew then, to be honest, whatever kind of job I had, I would somehow base myself in the countryside. And I often liken myself to a kind of old school 18th century itinerant journeyman. There's been no plan. I wanted to call this book Unplanned, but they wouldn't let me.
Yeah,
but that is the thread of it, really.
Here's the thing. You've mentioned this twice, and I'm a great believer in this because, I'm living in the madness of Marbella at the moment, yeah? But if I were to up and hit the road, one, this would be a very quick interview. But two, you can get out of, Marbella, and I live I go up the hill, past La Concha, and I get into the countryside literally in 10 minutes, and I live in the Spanish equivalent of a market town, i.e., it's like living near Market Harbour, or it's like living near something like that. And so the pace of life is different, but you get up in the morning, and I can look across to the Sierra Nevada from where I am, the mountains of Granada, and you feel You know, and people spend a fortune on therapy and, you know, going to see coaches and this, that, and the other, you know, for their life. But you get in the countryside for 10 minutes and no matter how bad you're feeling, you will feel better, Jules. It's you know, I think we can agree on that, can't you?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And I can picture well the area you're talking about. I used to have a girlfilm years ago who had a place in Fuengirola.
Now we're talking, exactly.
So we used to kick around Mijas and Cordova and all of that.
In which case, you know the Andalusian countryside and the benefits that has to your soul then, but, you know.
Oh, I do. And indeed, we've done shows. We used to do a series called Escape to the Continent, which was a kind of offshoot of Escape to the Country. And I remember kicking around Matharon, which was great fun, slightly, you know, further north up the coast. But, but yeah, hanging out in Tarifa when it was cool in the day, you know, it was great. I love those. I'm going back some years now. You know, it was good fun. But you're right. You don't need to do anything crazy. So long as you're in it and you can appreciate the view, the peace, the sound of the wind, the birds, you know, it all sounds very dreamy and romantic, but I do think these little pauses in a day are what help us keep the lid on things, to be frank.
The other thing is that I said, you know, there's this whole sort of trad movement in the States, and, you know, the trad wife thing, and people saying, oh yeah, well, I grow my own this, and I'm out there milking cattle at 5 a.m, and I still bring up 15,000 kids or whatever, which is all great, and it's all very Vanity Fair. But as I said before, it's hard, and also it can be brutal. You know, there is a lot of tragedy. You know, one full slip. I'm not saying you're going to fall backwards into the combine harvester, but, you know, animals have to be put down. There's a brutal reality. If you have lambs, then guess what? This one part of the year you're not going to have very many. You know, there's not a lot of time for sentimentality, and for a lot of farmers, you know, they have seen, as we saw with some of the recent sort of tax breaks, or not tax impositions they were trying to bring in. You know, it is a hard life, and for many, it might be rewarding on some level, but in other words, they might think, you know, why are we doing this?
Well, it is a vacation, you know, and I think back. I spent 20 years of my life living in the Cambrian Mountains of mid Wales in a Welsh-speaking farming community. You know, that's hardcore landscape, and that is, you know, for many, you know, genuine old school subsistence farming. And I say in the book, actually, I could tell what the price of lamb had been at that Thursday's market by the atmosphere in the pub when I walked in the evening. You know, it was very different to the mates I'd grown up with in East Anglia, who were sons and daughters of big farmers, you know, where the scale, you know, is completely different. But yeah, it requires resilience. And you're right. You know, I mean, any livestock farmer worth their salt will tell you that where there's livestock, there's dead stock. You know, so that kind of, the circle of life is what it is. But, you know, come lambing, we do a lovely series called Springtime on the Farm. Again, with me and Helen and JB and the boys. And, yeah, it's something very magical. You can lose yourself in that moment when you pull a lamb and you see this new life come into the world. But, you know, 10 minutes later, something else will have happened, which isn't quite so dreamy or so romantic. But that is the nature of it. But it doesn't take away from the enormous compassion that I see in farmers for their stock. Yes, they're breeding them, you know, as a commodity. They're breeding a crop, if you will. But, you know, they are still very warm, compassionate people. And I think that's what's so important. And that's what drives British farming to have, I think, some of the best standards in the world. You mentioned
your children. You grew up, you know, not in a farming environment, so you grew up in the wilds of deepest, darkest, so Essex region, wasn't it? That's where you come from, Jules?
Essex, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
That can be quite wild in other ways, but let's not even go there. Last train out of Liverpool Street Station on a Friday, if you know what I mean. But having said that, I mean, I grew up in the countryside. You know, I didn't come to, you know, although people may think I was fully formed around Puerto Banús, but no, you know, I grew up, as I said before, in this rural environment, and that
I want to see a picture of your yacht.
Oh yeah,
absolutely. I'm sure it's gorgeous.
I'd love to show you my yacht, but hey, you know, it's being borrowed. It's got to go in whilst I get the Lamborghini service. However,
nice.
But what I'm saying is, you have this background. You know, you had the childhood growing up in you know, Essex suburbia, urban environment.
Yeah.
And your children didn't. They had the countryside environment, which again, I mean, I remember going off on adventures, you know, with either my sister or my country mates, and we could be gone for the whole day, and you know, climbing over and discovering stuff. In a way that perhaps, you know, in an urban environment, you would be phoning the police, and because this is 70s childhood, Jules, so this is pre-mobile phones, etc. But you do get an education as a child in the countryside that is, you know, which is a bit more robust, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we have one son, Jack, who's now 11, and you know, frankly, he's living the childhood in some respects I wish I'd had. You know, he's lucky; he lives in a lovely house in a gorgeous part of the world, as I did, to be fair. But he is very much plugged into country life. So, yeah, I mean, there's no two ways about it. It does. If kids want to embrace it, I mean, we're lucky. He's embraced it. I mean, he could be sat there on a couch with a screen all day long. I mean, I don't think we let him get away with it, but thankfully he has no sense that that's what he wants to do. He's outdoors all the time. He watches these guys on YouTube in the States, you know, building cabins in the middle of nowhere and servicing chainsaws and God knows what, you know. So he's very much embraced it, but there is a resilience to it, absolutely. Whether it's, you know, going out to feed the chickens in the morning, you know, putting up with some weather while we've got a job to do in the garden, and taking pride in whatever he does. You know, I'm building him a cabin at the moment. When I get time, it's frustrating at the present. I don't seem to get as much time as I'd like, but you know, we love all that stuff, and that creative endeavor, which kind of binds you into where you are, for me, is one of the great joys of country life. I bought my first house in the Cambrians. God, I was 26, 7, I think.
So
it was
about
a wreck.
5 years
Nobody
ago,
wanted
then, basically, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. It was a total wreck. It needed everything doing to it, literally everything doing to it. And I loved it. My mates, I was a young researcher then in the TV game in London. And, you know, everyone was partying and doing London and all that meant. And every Friday I would shoot back down the M4 to West Wales, to a fantastic community of lunatics, really, who had, I mean, the village I lived in, Llandough Brefi, made infamous in the series Little Britain as the home of the only gay in the village. But in truth, its history goes back thousands of years. But it was also the scene of one of the biggest LSD drugs busts in world history in the 70s. So you can imagine, you know, around this place had washed up in amongst the Welsh-speaking community some very colourful, what I would call sort of refugees of the 60s and 70s. And these were my mates, you know, and it you know, for a young lad from Essex, this was colour. Yeah, this was exciting. And all of that kind of helped bind me to the place in a way which I could never have expected. It was my home for over 20 years, but wow, yeah, some tales there, I can tell you.
I can just imagine these people sort of staggering around, like clutching copies of, I don't know, Led Zepp 4, going, oh, I did the artwork on this. Yeah, and then there's a place called Castellar, which is up by Sotogrande area. You know, if you've done Tenerife, you know that bit. And Castellar is your original castle, yeah, which was abandoned in the 70s because it was too big. It was built by the Moors, so it's proper 11th century, yeah. And all in 1970, all the villagers moved out to a proper purpose-built place, and all the Dutch hippies moved in up there for literally 20 years, and it's the same sort of vibe basically. People staggering around. Now, since Game of Thrones, they kicked them all out, and they've made it like, you know, sort of so it's very up and coming now. But that sort of refugee. So I mean, tell me a little bit then about why you wanted to put all this down. Your journey, as the Americans would say.
My journey. It's been a hell of a journey, Giles, I got to tell you. I guess, you know.
Gee.
The guy that wrote it was amazing. The script was awesome, you know. No,
I'd like to thank the Academy.
Yeah, exactly. No, look, it's a very simple, honest tale, really. I mean, this is now my 30th year in the TV business. 30 years ago this year, I was a runner. You know what that's like, you know, making the tea, selling faxes, etc. And here we are still hanging on 30 years later. And it's been, you know, a huge privilege for a kid who didn't really know properly what he was going to do to found a career that's lasted so long and which has been so rewarding. I think, if I'm honest, it probably took me 10 years to get over what was a very good education, to finally figure out what it was I was going to be. And actually, I think I was talking to some parents the other weekend, actually. Oh, excuse me.
It's all right. Please try not to choke live on air, Jules. It'd be, you know.
I think I've just got a mozzie down my throat.
That's probably country living, you see.
There you go.
It's all protein.
But yeah, I think we spend a lot of time, encouraging our kids to think about what they're going to be. But actually, my question is much more visceral. It's kind of, who are you? What are you? And actually, if somebody had sat me down and said 30, 40 years ago, I think, Jules, you're a very creative guy at heart, that would have been a kind of pointer, right, which would have been really useful, probably more useful than, O-level chemistry. But that's the game, really. And I think, where I've come at the book is trying to write it effectively for my son. I think it's good to picture your audience. And I pictured him, and I was thinking, well, what to put in it? What's the sort of stuff that I hope he would learn from, those little anecdotes? And the book is essentially not just about me. It's really about the people I've met along the way, the colourful characters that have often helped me greatly, through my career, and really given it, the tales and the colour, as I say, that's made it such a rewarding 3 decades now, and nearly 2 decades on Escape to the Country, which, as a broadcaster presenter, there's been such an enormous privilege to have the chance to work on a show which now travels around the world. It brings so much pleasure to so many people. And so, yeah, it was an opportunity just to kind of draw it together and put a little bracket around this little anniversary. And I think, we often, what it's like, you're head down, you're kind of rushing through your career and life and all the changes and challenges that come with it. When you actually stop and cast your mind back to a moment in time and think, actually, yeah, what was it about that was important or just made me laugh or whatever it was, and you start to see patterns, and you can start to draw those together in a narrative. But it's a brief canter through 50 odd years, mate.
And
which is what you leave out, you know?
Yeah. And on a day like today, when you look behind you, you see, and on a day like today, you can kind of forget that it spends 10 months of the year absolutely persisting, and you look at the greenery and you think, myself, Jules, not done too bad.
Well, look, I still, think of myself as that young 20-something researcher going into the game for the first time. I certainly don't look it, but I think you're in my mind, what's tomorrow? What's next year? I think that sense of what's over the horizon, that curiosity, which has always driven everything I've ever done, is crucial to hang on to. So, yeah, I think if the moment comes and you think you've got somewhere, you're in trouble. I think you need to keep going.
The book is called Wild at Heart: My Journey to a Country Life. It's by the brilliant Jules Hudson, who's in rude health today. I just want to tell you. If people want to find you, presumably you're quite easy. Do you do the social media thing, Jules? Can we find you on the line, as it were?
Yes, you can find me on absolutely. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Facebook. The Jules Hudson. The book is available from all good booksellers, etc. And if you really want a personally signed copy, they can come to my website, juleshudson.co.uk.
Well,
and I'll send it out. I'll write it by hand and send it out to you.
Right then. Well, there you have it then, ladies and gentlemen. The book is called Wild at Heart: My Journey to a Country Life. It's by Jules Hudson. Jules, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you this morning.
Giles, absolutely lovely to see you. I wish I was there with you. We could go share a cold beer right now, because that's exactly what I'm in the mind for. But it's not yet lunchtime over here, but it is where you are. So good luck to you, sir.
There you go. Well, we'll see what we can do. Jules, thanks for your time today.
Hey, pleasure.